If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Today, we got a great guest. It is a real great guest. We got Billy Hayes. This is the guy from the movie Midnight Express who went to Turkey. He tried to smuggle some hash out of there. Okay. And they caught him. My God. And if you ever saw this movie, this guy's been to hell and back. And check out the Opperman Report blog, because we got a picture of him from when he was there in the prison. And you just look in his eyes, man, and you can just see this guy. This guy was going through hell, real hell down there. He's written these 3 books. Of course, Midnight Express, everybody knows that one. But then there's the Midnight Express. What is that? The Midnight Express Letters from a Turkish Prison, 1970 to 1975, and then Midnight Return, Escaping from Midnight Express. He lives in Vegas here locally. His name is Billy Hayes. Billy, are you there?
I am, sir. Nice to be here.
Dude, man, what a life.
It's been interesting. It's definitely been interesting.
Now, do you ever, because I think like this, now, do you ever think, you know, it's like 30 years later, but do you ever think, because you got life, they were going to give you life.
Right. Well, originally I had a 4-year, 2-month sentence, and then I'd been there for a bunch of years, and 54 days prior to going free, the sentence got changed, and they gave me a life sentence. But the original judge, who originally sentenced me to 4 years, was forced by the High Court in Ankara. They were responding to Richard Nixon and the war on drugs, and they wanted to pressure Turkey and all these other countries to increase their drug penalties. And I was one of the fools who was in the line of fire, and the same judge, the only prerogative he had to sentence me to life, but he could reduce it to 30 years, which he did. Thanks, I guess. But he actually felt bad. The man showed me his hands were tied. He said he wished he'd retired before he was forced to this verdict. So, you know, he felt bad for me, but he still sentenced me to 30 years in jail. So my eventual sentence was 30 years. Okay,
but just think, you could still be there right now tonight.
Yeah, one way or the other, though. Desperate men do desperate things, and I was getting very after 5 years in prison, I was so desperate. I needed to get out. One way or the other, I just needed to get out because I couldn't spend the rest of my life in jail.
Okay. I got so much to ask you, man. Okay, now you escaped.
Right.
Is there a reward for you right now?
No, originally I escaped in October of 1975. I actually was in there from October of 70 to October of 75.
Right.
When I got out, the Turkish government didn't issue an Interpol warrant for my arrest when I escaped or when my first book, Midnight Express, came out. When the movie Midnight Express came out, there's a scene in there in the courtroom in the movie where I get resentenced, where they've got my character. These are Oliver Stone who wrote the script. These are Oliver Stone's words. He's got my character screaming, "You're a nation of pigs, and I blank you all, and I blank your sons, and I blank your daughters."
Right.
This inflamed the audience who saw Midnight Express. Well, you've seen the film. You know, that courtroom scene was so emotional, and it also infuriated the Turks. And what I really said was, I've been in your jail for more than 4 years now. If you're going to sentence me to more prison, I can't agree with you. All I can do is forgive you. That's in the court record. That's in my first book, Midnight Express. That's diametrically opposite what they've got me saying in the movie. And the whole world, if they know my story at all, it's through the movie because it was so powerful. And film is such a powerful medium. And I've been saying from day one that, I didn't say that. And that the film, a brilliant film, I mean, so well made. And Alan Parker, the director, is brilliant, and Brad Davis gave his heart and soul for the movie, but it doesn't reflect well on the Turks at all. In fact, what I say is that the movie doesn't really represent the country or the people, and my little voice is lost because the images on the screen are so powerful. Turkey's tourism dropped 95% when that movie, Midnight Express, came out, and to this day, they're still dealing with repercussions from that movie. So it's been a strange journey, to say the least.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I thought that end part was real. Now, okay. So
no, well, one of the reasons I've been doing this one-man show, I get a chance to say this and to talk about it because I was friends with Turks. Here's the problem. I did 3 successful hash smuggling trips. By the way, hash is marijuana, for those who don't know. I made 3 successful trips prior to getting arrested on my 4th trip. I don't get any credit for the successful hash runs I made. I'm known by the 4th one where I got arrested. When I came back and got to write Midnight Express, I came home on a Friday after I escaped. I got out and I flew back, and I landed at Kennedy Airport. There were 100 screaming with questions and answers. I got home on a Friday. By Monday, I was writing the book, Midnight Express. I wanted to forget prison, but, I had so much going on, and I owed everybody in the world money, and in truth, it was the best thing I could do was to write the book. I wanted to forget jail, but it forced me to write about it. I was an English major. I went to journalism school at Marquette. I went out into the world to experience life so I could write about it. Surprise, surprise. But writing the book was very cathartic for me, and it was really good to get it up and get it onto paper. But what I couldn't do was write about my first 3 trips to Turkey. I loved Istanbul. I got along great with Turkish people. I had a Turkish girlfriend while I was traveling. But on the 4th trip when I got busted, when I first got back, in fact, I talked to my lawyer who tried to help me while I was inside. I told him I want to write about my 3 previous trips to Istanbul prior to getting arrested. And he said, well, just let me ask you one question. You want to write on paper that you 3 times smuggled hash from Istanbul to New York before getting arrested on your 4th trip. Is that correct? I said, I guess so. He said, one question, are you out of your mind? You can't say that. It was 1975. We were at the height of the drug war. I said, well, I can't prove. There's no evidence that I smuggled the first 3 trips. He said, you've got the United States is taking care of you now. The Turkish government is going to ask for an extradition for you. You're an escaped convict. You don't want to piss off the United States government. You can't say that you made 3 successful hash runs before getting busted on your 4th trip. So when I wrote Midnight Express, I couldn't talk about everything happening prior to getting arrested. And, of course, the prison, like any prison, is not going to be a nice place to talk about. But my first 3 trips I couldn't talk about. So there was an imbalance there. And then when they made the movie, they took my book, Alan Parker and Oliver Stone, they took my book and made their film. As a filmmaker now myself, I understand the process of what you have to do, but they made some major changes, which some of which I can understand and appreciate, some I can't. But the biggest change was the attitude towards Turkey and the Turks. The movie was deadly for Turkey and their tourism and their attitude in the world. And I've sort of been trying to balance that ever since. Doing this show gives me a chance to do it. I get a chance to talk about this, and people hear the real story. And doing interviews like this with you, people hear the real story, which is something I would like to get out there.
Okay, one question for you. Now, you
Sure.
said you went there 3 times. You're from New York.
Right.
Okay.
I'm assuming you are too, right?
Yeah, I'm from.
Yeah, of course.
That's why I'm going to bring.
I'm from the Bronx.
Me too, the Bronx. It's Soundview Avenue.
Hey, listen, remember Al Pacino? They said, Al, how do you go around all the time without a bodyguard? He says, I don't need a bodyguard. I'm from the Bronx. It's kind of like that.
But wait a second. Now, because around 78, 79, I was buying hash in Manhattan for about $800 a pound. Now, what were you paying? Because if you have to pay for this flight to go to Turkey to get it, and what were you paying and what were you selling it for?
About $200 a kilo.
Okay, so $200 for 2 pounds, which is good.
2.2 pounds a kilo, yes. $200 a kilo. Each trip, I would buy 2 kilos. I would tape it under my arms on some trips. I actually taped it to my leg my first trip and then wrapped a cast around it. You can make a cast. It's like plaster of Paris tape. You put it in water. You wrap it around. That's how they do casts. I was working at Marquette. I was working part-time at the hospital, working with disturbed kids. Strangely enough, I got a job as a child psychiatric aide. I have no experience in that. I'm an English major. I'm a journalism major. But I met a lady who worked at the hospital. She was older. I liked older girls, like 30. And I tried to pick her up, and she sort of put me down. But she said, I work at the local County General Hospital in Milwaukee. And I said, gee, I need a summer job. And she said, well, what experience do you have working with disturbed kids? I said, none, but, I get along good with kids. Next day, I was at the hospital. I worked there for several months, which was a very intense, emotionally powerful thing for me because I really wasn't emotionally ready to deal with this. But I do get along with kids. But at one point, I would get off. It was a locked ward. And at one point, I would get off the locked ward every break to walk around the hospital. And I walked past a room that was the cast room. I saw a doctor dipping a roll of plaster tape into water and wrapping it around a patient's broken leg, creating a cast. And I thought, that's pretty easy. I could do that. Wait a second. I could do that. My friend had just come back from Istanbul. He had 2 little grams of hash hidden in his money belt. Best hash we'd ever seen. And he told me, he said, it's cheap. It's easy. They sell it right on the street. So one thing led to another, and 2 weeks later, I'm in Istanbul. I've got 2 kilos of hash plaques strapped to my leg, and I'm wrapping a cast around the hash. And then I clomped to customs in Istanbul, and I clomped to customs in New York, and made my first successful hash run.
And then what were you selling it for in New York?
I made about $2,500 or so for each kilo. So each trip, I would clear about $5,000, which back in 1969, my first trip, and I'm, 20 years old. I've got no responsibility, money in one pocket, hash in the other pocket. Yeah. Life was good.
Yeah, that's like a year's rent back in those days, yeah.
It was like an immense amount of money, and I had no expenses.
Okay.
Of course, I was running free and wild, and I wasn't thinking about anything or anybody but myself. And that, of course, leads to, well, we'll get to that.
And how were you selling it in New York? Just to your friends and stuff? Or were you selling it in bulk? Or you had a spot?
You don't have to sell hash. They come and buy it from you. I mean, it was the best hash we'd ever seen. Back then, most of the hash, most of the weed, marijuana, was bad. It was ditch weed from Illinois or somewhere. But the only good weed was from Mexico. Was the best hash I'd ever seen. So when I brought it back, I would cut it up into little tiny gram pieces and sell it essentially by the gram.
Okay, good. Okay, then you're making
everybody I knew smoked hash back then, or pot, or marijuana, whatever, and they all bought it.
Okay, and where were you from in the Bronx?
I was born on Tinton Avenue, and we lived there till I was 7 years old, when the city was getting to be a rough, tough, bad place, and my dad moved us to the suburbs so I wouldn't go bad. Surprise, surprise. And I lived in Babylon. I grew up out on Long Island in Babylon.
Okay. Well, yeah, Babylon, that was a
great place to grow up. I loved it out there.
Okay, very cool. Okay, so now when you got there, did you know anybody in Turkey when you went there to buy this stuff, or you played it by ear?
No, I played it by ear. I landed in Istanbul at night, and I actually wandered out into the street the first night I got there. And people had told me, go to Sultanahmet, which was the Sultanahmet Square. It was like the center of the hippie haven of Istanbul. A lot of freaks traveling around the world stopped in Istanbul, and Sultanahmet was the big place to stay. And I ended up talking to some people. I met some guys first night, who then tried to rip me off, actually did rip me off, and sold me some bad hash. It was kuna, they call it. It's like dirt and goat stuff mixed up together. But eventually I was able to meet a guy, and we became friends. He tried to rip me off at first, too, but then we became friends, and I went back to – he was a cab driver. I went back to his house, sat with his wife and his kids drinking chai, or tea, while the cabbie and his brother-in-law pressed the hash powder, which is how you get it, into plaques, because I knew I wanted them a certain size, because I knew where I was going to put them, either on my leg the first time or tape them into my arms after that, because I only used the cast once. But we became friends, and this same guy is who I bought my hash from each one of my 4 smuggling trips. And
so when you get there, how long would you hang out in Turkey?
I was there for a couple of weeks, my first trip, because, again, I got ripped off my, second day that I was there and lost all my money, so I had to contact my friends back in New York. They wired me money to American Express. I traveled around Turkey a bit, came back to Istanbul, and then was able to score some really good hash and then put it in the cast. After that, each time I would go to Istanbul, I'd spend a couple of weeks there because I loved Istanbul. It's an amazing city. And, again, I got along great with the Turks, except for those people who were, arresting or beating my feet. But I didn't meet them until later. But I actually quite enjoyed Istanbul. It's an amazing city.
Okay, now the time you got busted, the fourth time, did you have to do the cast gig, or you didn't use the cast?
No, I only did the casting once because as I was leaving Istanbul with the cast the first time, clomping up to customs, the customs guy, he looks at my passport, he looks down at my cast, and he asked me, how did you break your leg? I said, I'm climbing on some ruins down south. Then he asked me for the doctor's note. The doctor's note? I was like a moment of panic, but I sort of got it together and said, I guess I must have lost the doctor's note down south, and, do I have to go all the way back down there with this broken leg to get another note? And the guy looks at me, and he looks at the long line, and he waves me through. And then in New York, as I'm approaching customs, I look back and I realize there's a little trail of white flakes behind me. And I realize my cast is crumbling beneath me as I approach customs. But they just stamped my passport and waved me through. In fact, as I was approaching customs in New York the first time, I don't know what it's like now, but back in 1969, let's say this is April of 69, at customs in New York, you can be up top. There's like glass sections up top where people stand up there and they see people returning from foreign countries. I look up top. I've got my cast is crumbling. I'm approaching I see the stuff on the floor. I'm thinking, oh no, my cast is crumbling. And I look up and see my three friends, the guys who essentially financed the trip, standing up in the glass where the visitors are, screaming and yelling and laughing because they know I'm back and I've got the hash, which really freaked me out. But once they waved me through customs, my friends, they kind of motioned me from a distance. They still didn't want to really be known that were with me yet. They motioned me, and I followed them out, and we went through the parking lot and got to their car and drove back to Manhattan as adventure accomplished. We broke the cast open while we were in the car, took out some hash, and smoked it in the car on the way back.
So you're pretty much flying on the seat of your pants.
Pretty much all the time. I was so stupid and so lucky, but I thought I was invincible.
Yeah.
When you're 21 years old, it's like once I did the first trip and got away with it, I thought nothing could touch me. Other trips, I didn't put it in a cast again. I taped it under my arms. And the second trip, I got on the train in Istanbul and took the Orient Express with the hash taped all over my body and took it across to Amsterdam and then flew back to New York. And the next two times, I just taped it under my arms, pulled on the sweater, pulled on my jacket, and walked straight onto the plane.
Wow.
What an idiot.
Yeah,
what an idiot. But, at the time, seemed like a good idea.
See, me, I would have got a doctor's note. I would have got a doctor, And
I didn't want to do the cast again. I did it once. I just barely got away with it. I just taped it under my arms. Nobody was getting searched back then.
Right.
Now you can't get on a plane. Everybody's searched. Back then, nobody ever got searched. This was just at the beginning of all this airport security. And when I got searched at the airport, the movie, they made some changes of stuff in the film, but some of the main stuff is right on. I mean, getting busted at the airport, that was pretty accurate, just the way it happened. They were out searching for, some planes had just been blown up out in the Jordanian desert. The PLO had blown up these planes, and now all airport security is on alert. They were searching for terrorists. They weren't looking for idiots with hash taped to their bodies, but up I stroll, the very worst place to be at the worst time, and up I come. Approaching customs, and I got busted. And the rest is oof.
Okay, couple more questions. Now, when you were taping the hash to your body, weren't you like sweating, and then you could probably smell the hash? No.
Well, I wasn't sweating so much. In fact, one of the problems, Brad Davis, who played my character in the film, I love Brad. Brad died a bunch of years ago. I miss Brad immensely. But one of the first things I said to him was, he's approaching customs. He's got dark sunglasses on. He's chewing gum, and he's sweating like a pig. I said, I'd have busted you myself. You got to look cool. You can't be sweating and chewing gum. But, that's what the filmmakers did, and that's what they thought about it. I was very cool and calm and collected. And invincible. I mean, the only way you get away with something like that is if you really believe that you're fine and innocent and cruise on through, which I did. And again, when I got busted, they weren't really looking for me. They weren't looking for hash smugglers. They were looking for terrorists. And this guy, they were searching people at the plane. And they hit this hash under my arms, and he's thinking this is a terrorist wired with explosives, and he screams, "Bomba, bomba," and all the soldiers swing their rifles down, and people are screaming and collapsing on the ground. And this young cop sticks his pistol under my stomach. The pistol's shaking in his hand.
Wow.
And he lifts up my sweater, and it takes him a moment to realize that it's not a mad bomber wired with explosives. It's just hash. It's some idiot out here smuggling hash. I could see the relief on his face. He yells to all the soldiers, "Hashish, hashish, Esral," the Turkish word. He says, "Esral, Esral," and all the soldiers put their rifles down. They're so relieved, and all the people get up off the ground. They're all so relieved that it's not a mad bomber wired with explosives. I, of course, wasn't so relieved because it was the beginning of a very long 5 years.
Oh, boy. Now, was your girlfriend really with you like it was in the movie?
No, they had her there so that when she did come to visit, you would know who she was. They had that scene in the glass where she presses her breasts against the glass, which was actually very accurate. But they initially. This was, I was there by myself. I didn't have a girlfriend with me. This is my friend from high school. We were, lovers occasionally, but mostly we were friends, and we became really, really good friends in jail through letters because she was my connection with femininity and my eyes to the world, and she traveled the world, and she was an adventurous. She was one of the first women who raced the Iditarod, the dog sled race in Alaska, and she climbed mountains in Nepal, and all of this she wrote back to me. So it was my way of connecting with the outside world, and she kind of saved me while I was in jail. It's horror, Barbara. Most of the letters, that one book, Letters from a Turkish Prison, most of those letters are to that woman, Barbara. The rest are to my friends and family, but most of it is to Barbara because she's the one I could really write to. I couldn't, I told my folks the truth, but I'm a poker player. I'm very discretionary about what I say, and I didn't want to really, they've got so much weight on them now that when I really got down, I had to write to somebody, and I wrote to Barbara, and she sort of saved me in jail.
Yeah. By the way, the Letters from a Turkish Prison, that's an incredible book, and there's all kind of pictures in it, too. And as you can see, the handwritten letters. Yeah.
I put a lot of handwritten letters so you can kind of see it, and the photos, like the photo you got online, that's me sitting on my bunk, and I believe it was late 1973 or 74, and this cameraman came around taking pictures of people, and there I am on the bunk, and I wanted to use that. The cover of the Midnight Express letters is a painting. It's Vincent van Gogh's painting of... it's called Prisoners Exercising, and it's prisoners walking around a stone courtyard. Right. And in the foreground is the blonde-haired prisoner facing out, looking at the viewer, which was Vincent van Gogh. He sort of had that reddish blonde hair. I saw the first day I escaped and got to, my first real day of freedom was in Amsterdam, and I walked out in the morning. I dyed my own hair black in an Istanbul hotel room during the escape because I had blonde hair and a blonde mustache, which kind of stood out. But so with this black hair, in Amsterdam, my first morning of real freedom, I walked out and got my hair dyed blonde because I have blonde hair. And 5 minutes later, I'm wandering the magical streets of Amsterdam, and I find myself the Rijksmuseum, and suddenly I'm face to face with this big Van Gogh painting, Prisoners Exercising. And this blonde-haired prisoner, I just dyed my hair blonde again 5 minutes ago, this blonde-haired prisoner is staring out at the painting at the viewer, out at me, who's staring back in at him. It was such a bizarre experience that I knew someday I'm going to use this painting for something. And it became the cover of the Midnight Express letters. It's that painting.
Incredible.
My wife has published all the books, by the way. We got the rights back to the original book, Midnight Express, years ago, and then there came Midnight Return, the sequel book. Again, prison was weird. Getting home was really weird, and that's a lot of what Midnight Return is. And then the letters, of course, were... That's Wendy is my wife. That's her favorite book because that was never meant to be a book. Those were just letters that could get out past the bars where I couldn't go. And they became a very interesting collection as I organized them and put them together again. Very emotional, actually, for me. As soon as I started reading these letters, they've been in a box for 40 years. All the people who I wrote home to, they kept all my letters. When I escaped, they gave them back to me, and I used them as source material for Midnight Express. Then I put them all in a box up in the attic, and they stayed there for 30 years. And then one day my wife made me clear out the attic, which I hate to do, and once I get started, it's like, I'm getting all the stuff out, and I get this out, and I took the box and I put it out on the street for the garbage. She made me pick up the box, bring it back in the house. I told this story to a friend of mine who's also my lawyer, and he said, "What letters?" I said, "These moldy, old, 40-year-old letters." He wanted to read some. And once he did, he said, "You need to take all these letters, organize them, annotate them so people can really read them, and don't change a word," which was really the difficult part, because it can be so embarrassing reading what you think you know about life at 23 and 24 and 25, looking back on it now. But as a collection of letters, they actually work. I can see the early letters really have the idiot who got himself in that situation was really still in those early letters, but that changed over the years and the tears, and I could really see a change between the first letters and the last letters.
Well, going back to the airport when they're busting you, right now, when they first grab you, are you thinking, well, I can buy my way out of this. Maybe I can work out a deal. Or maybe I can escape.
That's funny. You must be from the Bronx, my friend. Yes, but the first thing I thought is, I can get out of this. Somehow get out of this. I mean, I'm arrested. I'm at the airport. I got cops all around me. They've got me locked up. I'm locked up the first night. Even the first night, I'm still thinking, somehow I'll get away, that nobody will know, and I'll get out of this. I didn't want to face the reality of what I've just done. And it wasn't until the next morning when a representative from the American consulate came out to talk to me, a Turkish guy who spoke terrific English, and started telling me what's going on, and none of which was good, the news that I'm hearing about what's happening and what I've been looking at. And then he gave me a piece of paper and a pencil and left me alone in this little locked room in Istanbul to write a letter home to my folks. And that's when I couldn't avoid it anymore. That's when I had to face the reality of what I've done, because I know that's probably still the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, because I know the pain that this letter is going to bring to my family and my parents. And I have such good folks. I mean, I have such wonderful parents, and I never thought about them until it was too late. And suddenly I realized I've just put my parents in prison, and they were there every day, every night for 5 years. My mom suffered through this. That was a very sobering experience. Prison forced me to grow up a lot, and I really needed to grow up. And that was one of the first realizations for me of what I've just done. You know, I do a lot of high school and college lectures and stuff, and invariably they kind of, people say, "What's your advice to these kids?" My advice is always, tape it under your arms. They'll never search you there. No, that's not it. The real advice is do what you like and know what you're doing. And knowing what you're doing means you take responsibility for your actions, because you have to live with the consequences. And I never thought about the consequences of my actions until it was too late. I was just running forward, and life was so good. I loved the 60s. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, free love, no AIDS. I loved the 60s. Yeah. But I was just running wild, and suddenly it all crashed on my head.
Now, did your parents know what you were doing going back and forth to Turkey?
No, not specifically. I mean, I left school just prior to graduation at Marquette. I was almost finished at Marquette, and I just left. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I need to get out in the world and experience life so I can write about it. And my dad said it's a huge mistake, and my mom, of course, was concerned, but they didn't really know what I was doing. And my mother learned early on, don't ask questions you don't want to hear the answers to. So, because I tell her, but they didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't want them to know, and wouldn't understand it anyway. I mean, for my dad, who, you know, solid, incredible, solid man of integrity and such, for him, drugs were drugs. Like the fact that he would drink beer and scotch is not a drug. It's just alcohol. Marijuana was the drug from hell. You know, all of that terrible anti-marijuana publicity that was put out by Nixon and the war on drugs folks and all the other people who wanted to demonize pot and still allow for alcohol and cigarettes. I mean, cigarettes, it says these kill you on the side of the package, and they're legal. Alcohol, still, by and far, the worst, most difficult problem in the United States is alcoholism among kids. But it's sold everywhere, and it's on all the TVs. You know, drink this, whatever, and you'll be like whatever sports star they're promoting. But for pot, you go to jail. 40 years I've been talking about legalizing pot, or at least not putting people in jail for marijuana. The hypocrisy and the idiocy of the war on drugs has become apparent now. I mean, luckily, we now have a lot of states that's legalizing, a lot of states that are allowing for medical marijuana, the merits of which can't be denied anymore. But it's not finished everywhere, and as we speak, there are hundreds of thousands of people in prison tonight for pot.
Yeah, even in states where it's legal now.
Well, most of the places it is, and very soon it will be. What is it? Victor Hugo, one of those guys, Balzac, one of them saying, nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. I've got a letter in the Midnight Express letters, a letter to my dad from 1972 talking about how I was disappointed that the California Pot Initiative, which they were starting back in 1972 to try and legalize pot in California, that it had failed, but it was an idea whose time has come. I was young and naive. It's taken 40 more years, but it is an idea whose time has come. Don't put people in prison for pot. I'm not advocating smoking pot. Do what you like. You want some advice? Don't drink alcohol. Don't smoke cigarettes. And do yoga every day. That's what I've done for 50 years. But nobody listened to advice. But just don't put people in jail for pot. And that's beginning to happen. Okay. Unfortunately, we have for-profit prisons. Yeah. Which is also a terrible thing in this country. And we have more people in prison here than any country in the world, which is incredible when you think about the land of the free. I love America. I protested everything bad in the 60s, the Vietnam War and civil rights and women's rights, and I took everything good for granted. And then I lost it all. And I realized what we have here and what we need to hold here. And that's part of it now, is changing the laws on marijuana, stop imprisoning people for all of these consensual crimes. I'm rambling. Usually I have my wife with me when I'm doing this, and she'll put her elbow in me and say, "You're rambling." So you have to stop me when I keep rambling like this.
Well, we got to take.
It's your show. Cut me off, please.
We got to take a commercial break, but trust me.
Okay.
Now the chat rooms are loving what you're saying. So
okay.
We are here with Billy Hayes, author of Midnight Express, the Midnight Express: Letters from a Turkish Prison, and Midnight Return: Escaping Midnight Express. But today we got with us here Billy Hayes. He's the guy from the movie Midnight Express. The guy's been to hell and back. There is no doubt. And seems to come out of it smelling like a rose. Considering, bro.
Well, I've got people say the same thing. My advice is always, go get yourself arrested, spend 5 years in jail, escape, write a book, and the rest is all gravy after that.
Yeah. It's all downhill, yeah. You must have an attitude like that, though. Listen, I've been through. Listen, pal, I've been through it. Any meeting you go into, right? What do you say? What are they going to do to me? I've been to a Turkish prison for 5 years.
It's an interesting perspective to have. I used to run marathons too, and I'm an actor, so you have to go in and do auditions. And I'd be out running 10 or 15 miles, and then I'd come back and I'd go to an audition, and people are nervous at the audition. I keep thinking, wait a second, I just ran 10 miles. I just escaped from a Turkish jail. What could happen to me? They're going to reject me for a part? It kind of puts a little perspective on it. Like my dad says, I don't sweat the small stuff anymore.
I live here in Henderson, right? And we got that Black Mountain, the highest peak here in Henderson.
Right.
They're over by, what is that, the Anthem, And me and my kid, we've hiked up that thing 20 times, 110 degrees. When my kid was 5 years old, she hiked up to the top of that mountain in about 105 degrees. Okay.
Good for her.
Yeah. And man, I'll be sitting in a meeting in an office someplace, and I'll look out, I'll see that mountain. I says, man.
Right.
Nobody in this room has done that but me,
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. It's true. Okay. I like, we recently moved here to Las Vegas. I love it out here. It's been really great. Really good for us.
Well, everybody winds up out here.
Seems that way. We're from New York. I was in L.A. for more than 30 years. But in the last 2 years, while we've been on the road doing the show, traveling a lot, we got rid of our house in L.A., packed all of our stuff up, and traveled. And in between travels, an old friend of mine, a lady who actually sang at my wedding 35 years ago, she's been living here for a while. So we've been staying with her, and we get a sense of what the city was like. And, not just people think of Vegas as the Strip.
Right.
Except out beyond the Strip, there's all this other country and incredible. We live out here in the West. I'm 10 minutes away from Red Rock Canyon. I can go hike up in Redwood Canyon, hang out in the middle of nowhere up there, and meditate as the sun goes down. I love it out here, and the weather is nice. I don't want to see winter anymore. The last 2 winters back east have been brutal. I'm done with winter. I like it out here. Winter comes, I got to put socks on.
Yeah, but don't forget, you're close to Mount Charleston too, though. So you could hop up there in a half hour. And,
pretty close.
Yeah. Red Rock, sure. Now, okay. Oh, by the way, too, now you were talking about this one-man show that you do. Why don't you describe that, and when's the next one coming up?
This is riding the Midnight Express with Billy Hayes. I mean, as long as they're going to promote this thing, let's promote it. We got Midnight Express in the title. We got Billy Hayes in the title. The truth is, this has been a show that I've been developing for a few years. And back in 2013, I met an incredible woman, a producer named Barbara Ligety, who's got credits up the yin-yang out in California and in New York. And she's produced things with Madonna and Sean Penn. And she loved my script. She really wanted to make this happen, and I've been doing this for 40 years now, working in Hollywood. I've never had a producer like this who so takes care of her artists and who did everything she said she would do. She said, we're going to do this and this and this. We're going to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. You're going to do the show. We're going to get responses from around the world. We're going to do the show all around the world. It's like, okay, I'll believe that when it happens. It's happened. She's made this happen. And we continue to travel the world doing the show. It's a chance for me to look, I'm 68 years old now. This all happened 40 years ago. And it's a chance for me to kind of put some perspective on everything. At first, I hesitated because I kept thinking people have to be sick to death of hearing all of this Billy Hayes Midnight Express stuff, and they don't want to hear any more of this. But what I discovered is people are still interested. There's a whole new generation that are interested. And what I really came to realize is that everybody can relate because everybody's been down in a hole somewhere looking for a way to get out and to try and find the light. My story is a little bit more compact and dramatic, but everybody relates to, being down in the depths and trying to find your way out. And I hope that with this story, aside from some fun and amusement, because it's a dark story, but I'm a kind of a funny guy, and I like to find the humor in things. Aside from that, I hope that the show can offer some encouragement and inspiration, and for me, that would be such a treat. What I'm finding from the audience, I do a show, it's about 74 minutes now, got it honed down pretty good, and then I just stay on stage and we do another 30 minutes or so of Q&A with the audience, because the show kind of answers a lot of questions that people have about what happened next, and what about this, and is that real, and the differences between the book and the film, and all that stuff. And also they want to know, and what are you doing now? So this gives me a chance to kind of bring out all I am and all that I have and put it in a theater piece, which as an actor, usually you finish a play. I've done dozens of that, both as an actor and as a director over the years. Usually you finish a play, and on the last night, you'll discover something in the play as a character that's like, why didn't I find this out, a month ago or 2 months ago? And the play is done, and you move on. And for the most part, you never get a chance to go back and do that show again. With this show, I keep getting a chance to do it again and again, and I keep finding more things. And for me, it's so cathartic, and I love doing it. And the audience lets you know if the show works or not. You know right away if it worked or it didn't. The audience has been so overwhelmingly positive and so encouraging to me that it's been a joy to be able to keep doing this. And we're hoping to be coming up and doing it here in Vegas. We're talking to various theaters now. It's looking like January, February, we'll be down in New Zealand and back to Sydney, Australia. I did Melbourne, Australia last year, and now we're going to do Sydney and New Zealand. There's an Irish tour that's being lined up, and I'm Irish, and I've never been to Ireland, so that looks like it might be happening afterwards. But we're still trying to get it back here in Las Vegas, where I would love to do the show. And obviously, when I know, you'll know. I would love you to come see it.
Oh, I would definitely love to come see that. That would be really cool. Now back to the prison.
Mm-hmm.
Back to Turkey prison. Now, okay. So now you write the letter to your dad. Now, did they shoot right over there to get you out?
My dad came over to visit after about a week. He was talking to people at the State Department of New York. He came to visit, and he was a rock for me. My dad, he made several different visits. He tried everything he could to try and get me out, to work in the State Department people. The bottom line is, people say, why didn't the United States government, bring you home? Well, it's the United States government that got me arrested. Yeah. They're the people who increased the penalties, pressured countries all over the world to increase their drug penalties to the point where we have these draconian penalties now. Prior to the war on drugs, most countries didn't even bother you for pot. And now it's the opposite end of it. And in Malaysia and places that you get death from marijuana. They smoke more cigarettes in the world there, but for marijuana you get hung. So that stuff was in the air.
What did your dad do for a living? What kind of career?
My dad worked at the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company in New York. He started there when he was 17, and he worked there for the next 42 years. You talk about steady and solid, worked his way up. He became a manager and a director and a VP and that kind of stuff. It just wasn't what I was going to do. I always wanted to be a writer. Since my earliest days, that's what I wanted to do. Mostly because you didn't have to dress up, you didn't have to take any bull from people, and you could travel around. All you had to do is write, and therein lies the problem. All you have to do is write. So I went to Marquette because they had a terrific journalism school.
Yeah, my dad was an accountant for the Children's Aid Society in Manhattan, and I put him through hell too, man. So we got a lot in common, man. I got to tell you, so I could just imagine your poor dad. He wasn't in any condition to go to Istanbul, you know.
Well, he made probably about 4 trips over the years. We didn't want my mom to come. It would have been just too difficult for her to see me there, and it would have killed me to have her see me in jail. Because that's, again, the pressure and the pain that I brought to my parents was probably the worst part of jail for me. Once you get in and once you get acclimated and you work your way around, you figure what I discovered in prison is that I'm very adaptable. I don't like change, but I'm really good at it if I have to. And I learned a lot about myself in jail, stuff I needed to learn. Life was so easy for me prior to that. I mean, school and girls and sports and everything else was easy, and then suddenly it wasn't easy anymore. And that was a good thing. I needed that. I needed some discipline, and I needed to think about who I was and what I was doing, and all of those metaphysical questions of, why am I here in this body, in this life, in this prison, in this world, all that stuff that on the outside in the 60s I had no time for. I was running full speed ahead, sex, drugs, rock and roll. I was running full speed ahead. Suddenly it forced me to think and evaluate, and that was a good thing. I needed to do that. And I discovered yoga in jail. Actually, I discovered yoga just before being arrested. I had Light on Yoga, which was written by BKF Iyengar. He's the man who essentially brought yoga from the East over to the West in the mid-'60s. I had his book, Light on Yoga, in my backpack while I was standing there at the airport being arrested. And I've done it every day since. Yoga saved my life in jail. It still does. I can't do without it.
They let you keep the book.
Well, you could for a while. Invariably, what I discovered was every so often, every couple of months, at 5:30 in the morning, the doors would clang open and the guards would rush in and soldiers would rush in and they call it an arama control, and they'd open the lockers and tear everything apart. And for some reason, they took all the books, and we didn't know why. Maybe they thought people were hiding stuff in them. We discovered later that all those books got sent out to the bazaar in Istanbul, to the used bookstores, and they got sold. But, you sell them, and then more books come in. They would allow books in. They would allow musical instruments. People played guitars and had flutes and things. They liked to, give prisoners something to do. But you could keep getting books in and out. We had quite a few copies of Light on Yoga and other yoga books once people realized the value of yoga. In fact, I work with a lot of groups now, Prison Yoga Project and such, that try and bring yoga into prisons because it's proven what a valuable thing it is. In jail, you have no control over anything. They tell you when to sleep, when to eat, when to get up, when to do this, what to that. 7 o'clock you wake up, 7:05 you piss, 7:10 you eat. It's maddening. The only thing you have control over is yourself. And yoga helps you to arrange your inner state and to balance things and to breathe and to relax your mental state, aside from physically keeping you healthy. I was lucky that I was in jail from 23 to 28, which physically, as a guy, is a good thing. You're at the height of your physical prowess. Emotionally, it was good that I'd just gotten beyond, being younger than that, it's really hard emotionally for kids coming in. It was hard on me, or not anybody, but as you're younger, it would have been really difficult. Or when you're older. Old guys in jail, it's so hard. I had my health, and yoga helped me balance my emotions and keep me from getting crazier than I already am. And I learned a lot of internal valuable lessons in jail when I slowed down and took the time to meditate. Part of yoga for me is breathing patterns and meditation, and I still do that literally every day. I can't not do yoga. It's become such an integrated part of my life.
Now, besides the yoga, did you have any kind of religious awakening? Did you read the Bible, the Quran, or anything?
Well, I was raised as a Catholic, but me and the church separated at about reason and puberty. My problem with the church is I went to Catholic school. I had nuns. I always say jokingly that the Turkish prison guards prepared me for the Hollywood producers, but the good sisters in the high school I went to, they prepared me for Turkish prison guards because those nuns were really tough. But my religious beliefs kind of went out the window because when you really start to rationally question religion, I hold all religions in equal disdain. I think religion is the source of most human misery. You know, if there is a God, please save us from the things men do in your name, because in the name of God there's been more misery and destruction rained on men. But at the heart of most religions is love. It's just that around it, this structure builds up, and pretty soon the religion becomes the opposite of what it was founded upon. You know, Christ spoke about love, and the prophets spoke of peace. In their names, there's been more death. Right now, all of these cowards, you know, shooting 14-year-old girls in the head because they're trying to get an education, saying that, you know, that Allah tells me to do this. That's bullshit. I lived in a Muslim country for 5 years. I know Muslims. There are good Muslims, there are bad Muslims, just like good Christians, good Jews, bad Jews, all that stuff. People are people. And when you condemn a whole country because of some madmen like this, the hypocrisy of that, for one thing, I know good Muslims. Well, the whole religion is bad. All religions have stuff in it that's bad.
Wait.
You can go through the Bible. There's stuff in there that's like, what? They're telling you to kill your son because of this or stone your wife because of that? You have to take it all with a grain of sand. I don't think religion really has any basis of truth.
Okay, but you said you lived in a Muslim country for 5 years, you said?
Well, Turkey is a Muslim country.
Oh, all right, okay. Yeah, the 5 years you were in prison. Okay, all right.
I had Muslims all around me. I know the Muslim religion.
Okay, no, I was wondering if you moved back to another Muslim country, but you're right. 5 years was the time you were in prison.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I get a sense of this. It's why when we first invaded Iraq. You talk about stupidity. I mean, you've got idiots like Donald Rumsfeld saying stuff like, well, there's been no history of sectarian violence among the Muslims in Iraq. Excuse me, there's Sunnis and Shias. I lived in jail with them. It's the same religion. They hate each other. It's like Protestants and Catholics. They're killing each other over the same religion. The insanity of that is beyond me.
Now, when you first get there, right, being like an American, you were a foreigner. Right. Were they like sizing you up? Were people like taking advantage? Were you like a target?
If you're a victim on the outside,
right,
you'll be a victim on the inside. If you're not, you're not. You're constantly being tested. But that's just the reality. I actually got off pretty lucky. I'm not real big, but I used to do a lot of sports and martial arts when I was a kid and all that bullshit. First night, I got in a fight with one of the guys in the jail, sort of a trusty prisoner who was sort of a big shit around the prison. And one thing led to another. Next thing I know, I've hit him, and he's down, and his nose is bleeding, and he's screaming for the guards, and they're rushing in, and they're dragging me out. And they took me down to the cellar and threw me on the floor and tied this rope around my feet and started beating my feet with a stick. It's called falaka. It's a form of punishment prevalent throughout the Middle East, not just Turkey. But in jail, if you and I were in a fight and the guards came in and you were all bloody, they would beat me equally. Or if they came in and I was all bloody, they would beat you equally. It kind of discourages you from fighting. It takes away the incentive of fighting. And the punishment they have is to beat your feet, which it was, it hurt like hell. I couldn't believe how it stung. I thought they were killing me. As it turns out, it really wasn't a bad beating. They didn't even break any bones. And that's how you distinguish if it was a bad beating or not. They didn't break any bones. It's like, whoa! I've got cuts and bruises, and for weeks my feet are swollen up, and the knuckles on my hands are beaten. But they didn't really beat me bad. One of the advantages of being an American or a foreigner, especially in Istanbul, is that you've got American consulates, or Swedish consulate, German consulates in the city, and eventually somebody is going to have to deal with the fact that you've just beaten up this national, whether it's me as an American or a German or somebody. They have to explain of why these guys got beaten in jail, because the consulates are there. So they kind of protect us to a degree. And That kind of beating where they just beat you, it's not so bad. They beat people and break bones the first day and then beat them the second day and beat them a third. They were just teaching me a lesson. People like, there were a lot of student activists and protesters going on while I was there in the 70s. And, these people, they would catch a student activist or somebody, they would beat him for information. They want him to give names of other people. And that's when it becomes bad. That's when, people say, well, you were tortured in jail. No. I wasn't tortured. I was beaten. There's a big difference between being tortured and being beaten. Beaten is teaching you a lesson. Torturing is getting information and all that horrible stuff that goes with it. I got off lucky because I got beaten the first night, but that guy, he walked around the prison for weeks with a black eye and a big swollen face. And people, would say, well, what happened to you? They say, well, that new American guy, Willie, which is my name in jail, Willie, beat him up. It's like, wow, really? He's not so big, but if they're looking for somebody to mess with, they'll look at somebody else. And it helped me, actually. My reputation in jail was, he's small, but don't mess with him. And that's a good thing to have. I got in fights in jail, but for the most part, I wasn't a victim. Everybody else, if you're a victim, you got it really tough in jail.
Yeah, like you said, if you can get along outside, you can get along inside too.
And I mean, again, I was a class clown in school. I learned early on that humor, comedy, can get you into a lot of places, can get you out of a lot of places. So I would always pick to choose either make people laugh or find the biggest, baddest guy and, take him out first. After that, people will leave you alone. Better to make friends with him than the other people won't bother you. So that was my method of surviving in jail.
Okay, let me just remind you to PG language. We've got to keep the language PG.
Oh, yes, okay. Sorry.
You're talking about a Turkish prison. A couple of words are going to slip out. Nothing you can say about that. Now, now in the movie, they gave you a chance to make a deal and rat out the guys that were supplying you the hash. Now, is that real? Was that true? Right.
Well, they did. The truth is, as you've heard, it was a cab driver. I made friends with him. I knew his wife. I knew his kids.
Right.
I'm certainly not going to give him up. What they said to me was, if you tell us where you got this hash, you'll be on the next Pan Am flight home. I knew that was not true. First off, I wasn't going to give up the cabbie. I just wasn't going to do that. Right. But I just knew that wasn't true. But I wanted to appear cooperative because I'd just seen people getting beaten in jail. My first days in there, I saw what they did to people. So it's like I wanted to be cooperative and tell them I could point out the guys that sold me the hash. I also thought this would be a chance maybe to escape. This is the very first day I'm in the jail. Before I've even gone out to the major prison, they brought me back to the pudding shop, which is the local hippie hangout in the 60s, where everybody traveling back and forth hung out in the pudding shop. And I told them that's where I bought my hash from. And these 4 cops took me out onto the street, plainclothes policemen. They're in a box around me. We're walking down the sidewalk. Freaks are jumping off the sidewalk a block ahead of us. Everybody knows these are 4 plainclothes cops. We sat down at the pudding shop. These guys kind of like positioned themselves around, kind of like the movie, positioned themselves around me. And I'm supposed to be looking for the guys who sold me the hash. What I'm thinking about is how can I escape? How can I get away? But with these 4 cops around, that's not going to happen. So I ordered some tea and I ordered some rice pudding, thinking this may be the last outside meal that I'm going to eat. And after about an hour, these guys gave up and they took me back to the local lockup. And I never did get to point out where the guys are. In the movie, they've got me running through some stalls, and eventually the American cop puts his pistol to my head. That's kind of what happened, but a little bit different.
But you did try and make a run for it?
Well, I was when I got busted at the airport, they kept me in this little room for a couple of hours and ripped off the hash, and there was fingerprinting and doing all that stuff. And then they had somebody come, and he was an American. I never learned his name. I called him Tex because he sounded like a Texan to me, who came and picked me up at the airport. I'm assuming he was DEA or somebody like that. But he drove me from the airport to the Istanbul lockup. And as I was in the car with him, actually, he took me out of the room, sat me down in his car, and he was standing up front doing paperwork with some Turks. And I'm thinking, I got no handcuffs on, the doors aren't locked. I'm hoping that maybe we'll get, drive somewhere, we'll get to the sea, I'll open the door, maybe Tex will let me pop out and roll over and swim away. I hear the door open, I turn my head, and there's a pistol pressed up against my temple, just like in the movie. And Tex says, William, you seem like a nice enough kid. I feel real sorry for you, but if you try and escape, I will blow your brains out. He meant it. I put off all thoughts of escape until later. Much later, as it turns out. 5 years later. Okay. Although I tried several escape attempts in between.
All right,
but finally,
let's get to that.
5 years later, I was able to pull it off.
Let's get to that after these commercial messages.
Sure.
We are here with Billy Hayes, one of the fastest talking guests we've ever had.
I'm from New York, after all.
Yeah, Midnight Express, man. This is the guy from Midnight Express. He couldn't talk his way out. I don't know how he didn't talk his way out of prison, but he escaped. Midnight Return, Escaping Midnight Express, the Midnight Express letters from a Turkish prison, and the original book that they made the movie out of, Midnight Express, but also, too, he does like a one-man show. Fascinating guy. Now you're saying you made a couple of escape attempts before the successful one.
Right.
Well, give us an idea. Was that true about
one of the things that I realized was I discovered there's an article in Turkish Constitution that says if you're judged to be crazy, literally insane, you can't be kept in jail. But if you're that crazy, they don't let you out on the street. They keep you in this madhouse. It was called Bakırköy. It's the mental hospital for the criminally insane. And I actually got myself transferred there for a couple of weeks. I bribed the prison doctor and got myself transferred to Bakırköy Hospital, Section 13 for the criminally insane, wanting to get a crazy report. And most of my friends from the 60s would have said, no problem for you, until I got there and saw the competition. I mean, I've been in a lot of strange places. Bakırköy Hospital was the bottom of the birdcage. There was really luckily, Turkey has closed that hospital 15 years ago. They closed it and locked it. They made more humane conditions for their mentally disabled. But at that time, it was an old barracks that had been used by the Sultan's Janissary troops back during the Ottoman Empire, and had a big wall around it with rusty barbed wire. And it was just this bin, but they threw all of these broken pieces in there. Kind of reminded me of the old Boris Karloff film Bedlam, where the inmates bricked the doctor up alive in the wall at the end. That's what this place looked like. And I spent 2 weeks there attempting to get a legal crazy report that would help me. It would get me out of the Samajala prison where I'd been, and they would keep me in Bakırköy, which would be a better place to escape from. The problem is, in Bakırköy, you're there, you've got no clothes. They take away your clothes, give you these little shorty pajamas. People walk around naked and all dirty and wrapped up in sheets. But if I could stay there, and I had a friend on the outside who had a car and clothes and money and a false passport, I climbed like a squirrel. I could get up over the old pitted stone walls of Bakırköy and gotten out. But I got out. I'm in the middle of Istanbul with nothing. I need someone on the outside to help me. Right. I contacted after a couple of weeks in Bakırköy, they brought me back to the main prison where I'd been staying for a couple of years. In fact, when I got back to prison, I said, "Oh, it's so nice to be back here." And all the guys are looking at me like, "What are you talking about? Nice to be back here." They hadn't been to Bakırköy. Everything's perspective. I didn't appreciate the world till I lost it. I didn't appreciate the prison I was in till I lost that and went to the madhouse. The madhouse, well, I can't even describe it. But I knew that I could get back there if I bribed the prison doctor. Everything works on the bakshish bribe system in Turkey. But I need someone on the outside, so I contacted my oldest friend in the world, who he was actually working the fishing boats off Alaska at that time. But he came back to help me escape, and he actually came to Istanbul, and we made some plots and plans, and we had a plan set up. And he went back to Mannheim, Germany, where he'd gotten a really good job in the John Deere tractor factory, making the money we'll need and organizing for the break from the madhouse. But a telegram arrived from my dad saying that my friend Norman was found dead in his hotel room in Mannheim with this big army bayonet through his chest, which pretty much was the lowest point of my life. I mean, not only have I gotten myself in jail and ruined my life, and that I'm causing my parents and all the people who love me daily pain, but now because he was coming to help me escape, my best friend is dead. And at that point, his death was bad enough, but it also took away all my hope. He was the guy I needed to get out. So I was pretty much at the bottom. But sometimes the bottom is a good place to be because it forced me to look and to discover things, and I actually did. I made some discoveries in jail that always sound so trite when I talk about them, but I discovered my reason for being. My reason for being is to love. I never knew that. I mean, I had to be locked up in a Turkish prison to realize that's what I need to do, whether it's one person on one or spread out as far as it can go. But love is the only truth I know in life. Religion talks about a lot of bullshit. Excuse me, I shouldn't say that word, sorry. But religion talks about a lot of stuff, but at the heart of it is love. Around it grows this whole barnacle of religion, whether it's, and name the religion, they're all the same. At the heart of it is love, which gets forgotten. And I only discovered that in jail. And when I did, it changed my life. And it still changed my life, because that's what I need to do, is spread that. And as far as I can spread it, that's my reason for being. And it was an epiphany for me. Everything changed from that moment on. And it still changed.
What were the circumstances around your friend getting a knife in his chest?
He was dealing with people getting false passports and a car, because he was going to drive from Germany down to Turkey for me, but he was also dealing with, underground elements. I needed a false passport, and he was in the process of doing that. But he was also, this guy's problem was women wouldn't leave him alone. Everywhere he went, girls just flocked to him, which is great for us back in high school and college. It's kind of like you put him on a string and send him out, and he'd bring back, he'd come back with 3 or 4 girls. So everybody loved him. He wrote me a letter while I was in jail. He'd come to Istanbul, we coordinated, he went back to Mannheim, Germany, and he wrote me a letter telling me about the progress he was making with plans. Of course, we're writing in code, and it's easy to smuggle letters in and out jail, actually. But he mentioned how he was messing with the wife of this American Army sergeant from the nearby base, which was typical of a Norman. Again, women just wouldn't leave him alone, and he loved it. And I guess he thought he was a whole lot more worldly than he really was. He was sort of a poet and a dreamer and such, and he just was found dead with this bayonet. It was an army bayonet in his chest. They didn't know who killed him. At first they said it was suicide, and then they realized it's not suicide. The guy's got a big army bayonet to his chest. I'm sure it's because he was messing with this army sergeant's wife. Nothing was ever proven, but for me it didn't matter really much anymore, because he was dead. However or why ever it happened, he was dead. My hopes for escaping from jail died with him, and everything sort of turned black for me for a while until I found a way out of it. But that's the reason why I think he was killed.
Oh, but you talk about a lot of bribery. Now, how were you getting money? Your dad was sending you money?
Money could be... luckily, we have a lot of time here. Money, if people would come and visit you in jail, if the American consul would come out, you would sit at tables, around a table in a room, and you could talk to people, and then they bring you packages and such, and all of it would get controlled, meaning searched, when you bring it back in. If you didn't have the American consul, you would have visits through the glass, like when my girlfriend came, and you can't really touch or pass anything because you're looking at each other and speaking to a hole in the glass. But when money would come out, if people would bring me money and give me like $10 bills, let's say, at a table out in the front where we're visiting, and now I got to go back and get back into the jail, and the guards are going to search you and look through all of your stuff, and they're going to say, what have you got? And I say, well, I've got, looking around quietly, I've got 10, I've got 9, I've got 8 $10 bills. He takes 2 of the $10 bills. I take the other 8 in my pocket, and I go into the jail. The guards all want you to have money because everything works on the bribe system. No matter what you do, there's a bribe. It's bakshish. When the guard comes to tell you that you've got a visitor, they come to the door and they open up a little metal thing in the door and they give you a visitor slip that gets you out. But before they give you the slip, you have to give them a pack of cigarettes or a 5 lira note. Everything works like that. So they want you to have money. So it's actually easy to get money in jail. This is as strange as that sounds. You have to know how to do it. Obviously, you've got to, know the ways of jail, but it's pretty easy to do. And then also, legally, you can have money deposited in the prison bank up front in the jail, and each week you're allowed to take out X amount of money from the prison bank. But the truth is, people smuggle it in all the time.
Now, everybody I know that's ever been in prison, they always got these long stories about recipes and stuff like that they used to cook, while they were in there. Do you have any of those?
Well, I'm not much of a cook, but invariably the food that they give you is like bread every morning if you get there in time, otherwise somebody will steal it. And then at noon they come around with these big steel pots full of lentils and beans. beans. 80 guys locked up together in a cell, and every day they serve beans. And in the evening they come around with some other kind of crap. But then they sell stuff. Prison is this vast captive market. And again, you can take money out from the bank or you can smuggle money in, but carts, outside food vendors would come around to the prison, pushing these big steel carts, selling all kinds of stuff, fruits and vegetables and yogurt and onions and olives and pistachios. And you can buy, if you got money, you can buy anything in jail. There's more drugs in jail than on the street. You can buy a gun in jail if you want. Anything you want, if you got money, you can buy in jail. It's a little microcosm of the outside.
So in your prison, there was a lot of guys using drugs?
Everybody's using drugs. Everybody smoked weed. Hash. They didn't have, it's the same thing, but it was how you make it and how you press it, and it's hash over there. And virtually everybody smoked cigarettes, which I didn't smoke when I went into jail. But everybody smoked, and there's just so much smoke in the air. I started smoking cigarettes in jail just because everybody else was smoking. I didn't even like it, which is why it was easy for me to quit. But everybody smoked hash because it made it easier to be in jail. And at one point, after I got out, this whole epidemic of heroin hit the prison. And in fact, in Midnight Return, I've got letters from a friend of mine who was in jail. I sort of follow, after I escaped, I follow his story of what it was like for him inside, and my letters back and forth. And I've got handwritten letters from him in Midnight Return talking about the heroin epidemic that hit the prison. But there's a lot of drugs around, of course. We actually, at one point, people were making homemade wine. You get grapes or you get pears, and then somebody from the kitchen would bring up some yeast, and they put it in a bag or in a can and have it somewhere, and you ferment wine just to escape. Everybody's trying to escape somehow.
Oh yeah, I was right. You stayed in touch with some of the guys that you were in there with prison with after you got out.
Not too much. What I discovered was that people you knew in jail, you really didn't want to have connection with when you're on the outside because they've sort of seen you at your worst and your lowest and stuff. Most people get out and they forget, or they try and forget. In my case, I didn't have that option. I got out, I got home on a Friday. By Monday, I was writing a book. I wanted to forget jail. I didn't want to write about it, but economics forced me to, and the situation forced me to. And the truth is, it was my therapy. It was so cathartic to get all this stuff out of me. It forced me to relive this stuff. I was having terrible nightmares at first when I got back. But as the words kind of stuck to the page, the nightmares sort of stopped. It sort of settled onto the page, and it became a very cathartic thing for me to be able to put this whole prison experience into a book. Then I discovered acting, and I met an acting teacher named Eric Morris in Los Angeles who saw right through me and knew all the stuff, that how I covered up. He said, you realize every time I get you to talk about your prison experience, you make some glib little comment or a joke. I said, well, that's not true. He said, it is true. You're afraid to deal with it. You don't want to touch this stuff. And I didn't. There was just so much going on that in jail, if stuff happened, and like emotional stuff happened, and you just couldn't deal with it, my image was just put it in this metal box and close the lid, because what you have to deal with is right there in front of you, here and now, in the prison. What's going on? All the emotional stuff, I just kept putting it into this closed metal box inside me. When Norman died, I had to put him deep in this box. I couldn't deal with it. And eventually I got out, and this box was rumbling. And, when I first got home, people suggested, very kindly, but they all suggested, you should think about therapy. I said, no, I don't need any therapy. I'm fine. I desperately needed therapy. Writing the book was the first version of therapy. And then becoming an actor and talking with Eric, and he made me realize, he said, all that stuff, you're afraid to deal with it. And it was the truth. But he made me realize that all of that stuff is my gold. G-O-L-D, as an actor. As an actor, you need to be able to connect with your audience. You need to replicate what's going on with your character. And I had so much stuff to use, but I was afraid to use it because it was overwhelming to me. And working with him really became therapy for me and made me realize that I can put all this stuff into place. I take all my chances on stage now. I don't want to do anything out there in the world again and get busted and go to jail. I'll take all my chances on stage. And all that stuff is part of my repertoire as an actor that I can use. And that's become so good for me and so therapeutic. I still do it. I do it every night when I'm doing my show.
That's a good question, though. Now, after you got back, you never did any more crime in your whole life. You never did anything.
Well, I smoked pot illegally until it became legal in California. I don't think I committed any of the crimes.
Okay.
Why would I? I don't need to.
I'm just, wondering. Now,
No, I mean, other than that,
a lot of people do,
Yeah, but I'm trying to think what I might do. Not very much.
There's still time.
Speed limit. I don't speed much. I'm very quick, but I don't speed. And now I have a medical marijuana license in California, so I could smoke there. I can probably smoke in Nevada in a couple of months because I think they're going to be legalizing here too.
Yeah, me too. It's all set up. Now,
yeah, well, it's about time, please.
Now, how'd you finally get out? Let's hear about the prison break and how you got back to the States. Because you had
I got myself transferred to Imrali Prison Island. It's an island 26 kilometers, or like 17 miles off the coast, in the Sea of Marmara. And I'd heard, again, in jail, you're always listening, talking to people, trying to find information about stuff. I heard that this island was a really good place to go. They called it half open because they didn't have like a wall around the prison. The prison in Istanbul had this big wall of barbed wire and stuff. The island itself, they considered the sea to be the wall around the prison because prisoners work there. A lot of prisoners were there, people who had been in jail for years, and now their time is running down, and they're less likely to try and escape, or for various reasons. I got myself transferred to Imrali Island. The same doctor who I bribed that sent me to the madhouse, he got me transferred to Imrali Island. The American consul was talking to people about somehow trying to bring me back home. There's something called what's the real name of it? The prisoner transfer treaty. It's now been in place for 40 years between the United States and a lot of other countries, where foreigners in the United States can get transferred back to their home countries, and American in foreign countries can be brought back here to serve the remainder of the prison sentence, supposedly. That whole process was happening while I got transferred to Imrali. So I was able to tell everybody there, and the prison doctor said, the American government is working to bring him back. And first off, nobody could believe I got 30 years for 2 kilos of hash. I was the first foreigner who received one of these draconian sentences. Unluckily, I wasn't the last one. But people would say, 2 years for pot? I mean, I saw guys who killed people who got 15 years. They got 15 years for murdering 2 guys. I got 30 years for 2 kilos of pot. So I was able to tell everybody on the island that I'm being transferred here because the American government is working to bring me home, which they all thought, well, of course they're going to bring you home. You're an American. But it just took the onus off the fact that I'm really there to escape. And this is an island, and I'm a lifeguard. I worked over at Gilgo Beach and Cedar Beach and Fire Island. I'm a really good ocean swimmer. I was a lifeguard for years, and I'm desperate. And desperate men do desperate things. I got myself transferred to this island. It was a work island where the fruit and vegetables would be brought over from the mainland every day. They had a canning factory there, cheap labor, prison labor. The boats that would come from the mainland weren't allowed to spend the night in our harbor because it was a prison island. But one day, a storm was coming up, and I saw that the boats were already anchoring for the night because the storm was getting so bad out that they weren't going to leave this little horseshoe-shaped harbor. And each boat had a little wooden dinghy tied behind it. And once I saw, at first I thought about swimming, but 26 kilometers is a really long ways, especially after 5 years in jail. But these little wooden dinghies, so I just knew the next time there was a storm, I arranged to get myself out past the night bed check, which was pretty easy. I became friends with one of the head gangster prisoner guys. In jail, it's really strange. The hierarchy in prison is sort of the reverse of what it is on the outside. The worst people who do the biggest, baddest crimes are at the top of the social structure in prison. The bottom of it is the hash smugglers like me. But I was the only foreigner on the island. All the rest of them people were Turks. I spoke good Turkish at that point. I made myself friends with the number one prisoner gangster guy who, in jail, there's the guards and people, and then there's the people who really run the prison, which are the wealthy gangsters who get busted for one reason or another, and they know somebody bribed somebody else's rival and they got thrown in jail. They're only going to be there for a couple of months or 6 months. They know they'll be out eventually. Paperwork will change. Somebody will get bribed. But while they're in jail, they live like kings, and they're the guys who really control things. I arranged to become friends with the head gangster prisoner, and I could get out past the night bed check because of that. And I knew if I got one of these little rowboats, I'm going to row to the mainland and get myself, one way or the other, get myself back to Istanbul. I had a friend in Istanbul, a guy who'd been in jail with me for a bunch of years. He'd become a Muslim. He spoke good Turkish. He was working as an assistant manager in a hotel. And he owed me big time. I kind of saved him from a bad beating once in jail, and he really owed me. So I knew if I could get to Istanbul, he'd hide me out in the hotel for a week. I'd get some false papers, and I'd slip out of the country. So I got myself out of the jail into this little rowboat. I swam out, cut the rope on a rowboat, rowed to the mainland, spent all night rowing across the mainland in a storm, hit the beach of Asia Minor as the sun was coming up, and then made my way back up across the coast of Turkey back to Istanbul, where my friend was, and I thought he was going to hide me out. But unfortunately, when I got there, the hotel manager said, "Oh, Wolfgang," which was his name. He said, "Wolfie, you just missed him. He left yesterday for Afghanistan." It's like, no, don't tell me that. That was the end of Plan A. I was so freaked and exhausted, I wanted to just collapse on the ground and cry.
Wait a second. Let's back up a little bit here. So all that stuff in the movie about you pulling the gun and changing the clothes, none of that really happened?
None of that. They got me killing a guard,
right,
butting this guard who they got me trying to rape me, which didn't happen, and butting this guard, and he hits his head on a spike. And then there's that sound effect. That I've watched that scene with and without the sound. It's all in the sound effect. It's like a couple of special effects guys spent hours with a big watermelon and a spike trying to find that right sound, and it's visceral, and it hits. They got me killing that guard and skipping out the door, which, I always say, if it was that easy, skip out the door, it wouldn't have taken me 5 years. I didn't kill that guard. I got transferred to the island and escaped off the island in the rowboat and then rowed through Turkey and spent 3 days running through Istanbul. When I got to Istanbul,
wait,
my friend wasn't there. That's the end of Plan A. My next Plan B was to get to the Greek border, and there's a river that separates Turkey from Greece. It flows down from Bulgaria, separates Turkey from Greece. And I knew if I got to Greece, they would never send me back to Turkey. They've been enemies for 1,000 years. And for my crime, it's pot. If I kill someone, that's a whole different story. Aside from the moral, karmic implications of killing another human being, legally, the Greeks wouldn't have let me go. They would have held me. The U.S. wouldn't have allowed me back in. I'd had to go to Uruguay or somewhere and live in the mountains, which is one reason I didn't buy a gun in jail when I was plotting all of this escape attempt. And I had money. My dad smuggled money into me in a photo album. And in jail, if you wanted a gun, you could buy a gun. But if I've got a gun and you've got a gun and we're pointing guns, somebody's going to be shot and dead. If I'm dead, I'm dead. Or if you're dead, then legally I'm not free. I can't go anywhere. So I didn't buy a gun because I didn't want to have that choice. But I was able to eventually make my way from Istanbul by bus to Edirne, which is an old border town on the river, the Maritsa River, that separates the two countries, and then swim across the river at night into Greece. I wasn't exactly sure. The river has changed over the years. The border's changed over the years. When I got to the other side, it was the middle of the night. I wasn't exactly sure that this was Greece. And I didn't want to run up to the first guy and have him be a Turkish soldier. So I kind of wandered through the woods all night. And just before dawn, I came out of the woods to a little dirt road, which I knew I shouldn't be on, but it felt so good on my feet because I'd taken off my shoes back on the Turkish side of the border. Now I'm walking barefoot. Shows how goofy I'm getting. But this Greek soldier, suddenly this bayonet slashed down in front of my face, and this guy yelled something, and I didn't understand him, and he yelled again, and I realized I don't understand him. And I speak good Turkish by now, which means he must be speaking Greek, which means I'm in Greece and I made it. And I kind of collapsed on the ground with this big grin on my dirty face, and the soldier started blowing his whistle, and more soldiers with flashlights circled around me, and this captain guy stuck his pistol in the light, and he said, "Who are you? Who are you?" I said, "I'm an American. I just escaped from Turkey." They kept me in a little room in the woods for 12 days while the Greek government figured out what to do with me. I know I could sit on my head for 12 days after 5 years in jail, and I know the Greeks are never going to send me back to Turkey. So eventually what they did was deported me as a bad influence upon the youth of Greece, which is literally the same charge against Socrates. They didn't ask me to drink any hemlock, which is nice, but they deported me, and I took a flight from Greece, and I was able to fly with a very strange stop at Frankfurt to Amsterdam. And I knew that if I'm going to be free anywhere in the world, it'll be Amsterdam. And it was. I mean, I got off the plane and took a bus into the city, and, they just stamped my passport like any other free man. And my first 4 days of freedom were in Amsterdam.
Wait, before we get to that, because you said you had no shoes. They gave you shoes?
Say again?
Because you said you came out of the woods, you had no shoes. They hold you for 12 days.
Right.
So they gave you shoes before they put you on a plane.
No, the American consul, Jim Murray, who met me, and after they caught me in the woods, they kept me there for 12 days, and they took me to Thessalonica, and Jim Murray, the American consul, was such a cool guy, came out and he brought me food and clothes and books and a pair of his own sneakers.
Okay.
And while I was in there for 12 days, I read Papillon, and I read Kazantzakis, and I read Catch-22 again. I'm an English major. You've always read Catch-22. Yeah. And then they deported me. So I had Jim Murray's shoes on when I landed in Amsterdam. And I knew once I got to Amsterdam, I'm free.
Okay, let's take a commercial break. I got a million questions, man.
All right.
This is crazy. My God, what a life, man.
Interesting.
Well, you made it, man. God bless you.
I did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We got Billy Hayes here, the author of Midnight Express, one of the fastest talking guests we've ever had. The Midnight Express letters from a Turkish prison and Midnight Return, Escaping Midnight Express. Oh, my God. Now, you're making this plan, right, with the rowboat. Before you do that, though, are you doing like push-ups and chin-ups and stuff like that to get in really good shape? Because you haven't been swimming.
I was an athlete in school. I was a wrestler and a surfer and runner and all that stuff. So I was always in shape. I used to do martial arts. And then, of course, in jail, I did yoga every day. When I got to the island, actually, my first job there was on a conveyor line, picking strawberries and they canned fruit and stuff because they had this cheap prison labor. But then I got myself transferred to a lifting and a toting job, carrying these 50-kilo sacks of beans and fruit up from the boats that would arrive every day and arrive at the dock, and then we'd carry them up the hill to the canning factory. And I wanted to do that job. I got myself assigned to that job because I wanted to get hard and healthy for my escape. I stopped smoking cigarettes in jail. I started in jail. I stopped. I was smoking hash in jail because it made it easier to be there. I didn't want it to be easier. My life was fading away. I stopped smoking cigarettes. I stopped smoking pot when my sentence got changed, and I just focused on getting out because I know, my life is passing. 5 teeth in 5 years have fallen out of my head. Friends have gotten married and divorced, and life is going on, and I'm still in jail. I got really, really strong and healthy to get out. Again, I was lucky I was young, 23 to 28 when I get out, kind of at the prime physically.
Yeah. I got you, man. But no, you weren't doing any swimming, though, right?
No swimming until I got to the island. Actually, the first day I arrived on the island was a free day. I got to swim in the sea. Okay. I've been bathing out of a sink with a plastic pitcher once a week with 10 other guys for 5 years. Wow. I get to swim in the sea. It was unbelievable feeling. I almost took off from there straight across 27 kilometers. But swimming, you could do it. About once a week, you get a free day. You could swim if you wanted to.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. But even rowing that boat, that must have been pretty tough, right?
Well, yeah, but again, I was in prime condition, and I was very motivated. I'd row 1,000 miles if it was going to get me free. I was really motivated. I was going to be free or dead. That was the bottom line. For one of the nice things about jail is your options are so limited. Yeah. You got to deal with what's in front of you. Where's your food? Is that a knife in somebody's hand? You got to deal with what's going on, but you don't have that many choices. Life gets really simple. It's one of the problems, and it's one of the hard things about it. You have to make your day interesting. What do they say? You have to use your time, or your time uses you.
Well, we're down to the last 20 minutes now. Out of all your experience through all this time, what do you want to tell us, man? What's the moral of this story?
Well, again, for a moral, I think I mentioned in the beginning when I talk to high schools and college kids, because they all think they're invincible. They know that nothing will touch them. And the reality is, my message is do what you like. Know what you're doing. Knowing what you're doing means you take responsibility for your actions, because you have to live with the consequences. And I never thought about my consequences. Now, when I do things, I try and think about the consequences before I do them. I think that's one of the factors of getting older and hopefully a little bit wiser and having a little bit of impulse control, which we know when you're young you have pretty much zero, is what I had. And again, for me, the lesson was that my reason for being is to love. That made me a very different person. It focused my life in a way that nothing else had, and it still does.
Now, so as soon as you got back to now you got back to the States, you got the new shoes. The guy gave you the shoes.
Right.
All this kind of stuff. Now, you went straight into acting? You didn't have to get a job or anything like that? Or you must have had...
No, actually, when I got home on Friday, by Monday, I went straight into writing the book. That's what I did instantly. And that took up 4, 5, 6 months. And then I was looking for, well, what am I going to do now? And my lawyer, Michael Griffith in New York, he got me out to Mineola High School to talk to the kids when I was just starting to write the book. And I thought, well, wait a minute, you want me to come to the school and talk to your kids? But it was a good thing for me. I got a chance to talk to an audience, and I loved the energy back and forth with an audience. And I went to HB Academy in New York, HB Studios, and studied there for about 6 months, and then moved to California, and that's where I met Eric Morris, the acting teacher that so changed my life. And I've been acting for 40 years, doing a lot of theater. I direct a lot of theater. I've done all kinds of TV and on soap operas. I got shot to death by Charlie Bronson in the movie Assassination. That's kind of the high point of my acting, my film career at least, was getting shot to death by Charlie, which I just loved.
Yeah, what was it like working with him?
He was a joy. He was a treat to work with. Very quiet, doesn't really say much. We were shooting a scene, the film called Assassination. His wife, in real life, Jill Ireland, was playing the wife of the president. Charlie was the Secret Service guy assigned to protect her, and I was playing Wolfgang, one of the terrorists who was trying to kill her. We were shooting a scene out in California at Will Rogers Park about 3:30 in the morning. It was cold. It was wintertime. It was sort of rainy. They were setting up lights up in the hills for her to run away, and then supposedly kick down a door of this shack that they've got there in the park, and I see her up on the hill, and I point the gun and try and shoot. It was taking them forever to set the lights. And at one point, Charlie Bronson comes out of his trailer, comes up to me, and he says, this is a long time ago, he said, "Kid, can you take a fall?" It's like, sure, Charlie. Well, I don't know what he was, but sure. Whatever Charlie wants, you say sure. And he tells him, all right, get the lights out of the trees. We're done with all of that stuff. Bring him down here. The kid he shoots the door, he kicks it in, he sticks his rifle out the window to shoot her up on the hill. I'm going to be down below the window. I'm going to grab the barrel of the rifle. The kid hangs on, and I'm going to throw him on the ground, shoot him, and we're all going home. It's like, okay, Charlie. And that's what he did. I ran up, I machine gunned the door, kicked the door, stuck the machine gun out the window. Charlie was down below. He grabbed the barrel of the gun and then threw me out the window. 6 times. They shot that 6 times. And then they rigged me up with squibs, and Charlie grabbed the gun, and he shot me, and they had all the squibs go off. People have said, wow, that scene in Assassination, the way you bounce around with all those, getting shot, it looked real. I had burn marks all over me from these squibs. They're not supposed to burn you. They're not supposed to do that. These 20 or 30 squibs were burning up my body. But it was a good scene. I got to be shot to death by Charlie Bronson, and it's my moment of film fame, I think.
I bet you wish
Theater-wise, I've done a lot of good work, but that's my favorite film part.
I bet you wish you had the hash tapes yourself.
Oh, yeah, it was really good hash.
No, I mean, it was taped and then they put the squids on top of that. But now,
that would have been good, too.
Now, did Charlie know that you were the guy that you were in prison for 5 years in Turkey?
Yeah, pretty much the word gets around. I don't usually tell people that. Strangely enough, guys coming out of jail don't usually tell people they just spent a whole bunch of time in jail. I never had that option. The whole world knew that I was in jail and why I was there. But I don't bring it up right away. Eventually, it goes out. What I found as an actor, it was a sort of a two-edged sword because it would get me in the door of a lot of places for auditions. Everybody wanted to see, who's this weird guy who escaped from jail? It didn't always get me the roles. They weren't seeing me as the part they were casting. They just saw this escaped prisoner kind of guy, and they wanted to meet me. And sometimes it got me jobs. There were a few things where it worked out perfectly. I did a thing called Stingray, a TV show with Nick Mancuso, where the guy supposedly had been in a Russian jail for 5 years because of something that the lead character, Nick Mancuso, did, and now I'm out and I'm stalking him. So I went into the audition. It's like, I don't have to do anything. I've already been in jail for 5 years. I can deal with that. So I got the part. So, sometimes it works for me.
I remember that series too. Now what?
That was fun. That was a great show. We shot that up in Vancouver in about a week.
Okay.
Great to work with. I really like Nick Mancuso. Terrific actor.
Now, what about like when you go to the bank and stuff like that? Because I know, like I saw you on Facebook, and as soon as I saw the name, I recognized it right away. And I says, "Hey, is this the same guy?" Now, do you get that?
Yes and no. Again, it's been a long time. It's 40 years ago, so depends upon who knows what. There's a whole younger generation that, of course, weren't even born when all this happened, but they've seen, the movie keeps playing. Again, there's my problem. I love the movie Midnight Express, but you don't see a single good Turk in it. It creates this overall impression that they're terrible people. This is a horrible country, none of which is true. You've heard my stories. But the movie is still out there. It keeps playing. Somewhere in the world, right now tonight, it's playing somewhere. They keep playing it. So if people don't know what I'm talking about, they think, well, that's what Turkey is. Well, I get a chance to talk about it in a lot of ways now. Sometimes people remember, they hear Billy Hayes. We know that name from somewhere. A lot of the younger kids have seen, there's a show called Locked Up Abroad. That was an English show that literally was 6 seasons of stories of people who have been locked up abroad, and they did their version of my show called The Real Midnight Express a few years back. And it was an incredibly successful show. They aired the show itself 35 times, and I stopped counting. I wish I'd gotten paid for each one of these, but I didn't. But the show itself, they air all over the world. They have an audience of 160 million people in 63 countries, and they kept airing that show. So there's a lot of younger kids who told me they've seen that show, so they know my story from that. Or they tell me their parents tell them about my story. I'm sort of, again, my life is at the very least a cautionary tale. When I was in Melbourne doing the show, a lot of kids, guys in their 30s and 40s now, told me when they were in school that it was mandatory reading to read the book Midnight Express. It's like, you guys need to learn what can happen to you in the big bad world if you're as stupid as this guy. So it was really bizarre for me to hear, kids who had read my book 20 years ago when they were in school.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched the movie. It was horrific. It was really startling. But when I rewatched it, and I've rewatched it, probably 10 times because it's a great movie. But when I rewatched it yesterday, it wasn't as shocking. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that because now we have 24-hour news where people are getting shot up in Paris?
I think so. I think we're almost inured to this thing. I mean, It's a bad thing to say, but there's so much death going on every day. Everywhere you look and hear and turn on, it almost washes over you. It just almost goes by you until you realize each one of these is a human being who's been shot or killed or gassed or whatever's happening to them. So I think the shock factor is almost wearing off on us, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, because this wasn't that long ago.
No.
And it was so dramatic. It was even the parts about the rats and stuff was so dramatic,
right. Well, again, I was very lucky. I have problems with the film, and Oliver Stone, wrote the courtroom speech that was not what I said, and Alan Parker's got me killing a guy, and I talked to Alan. They showed me the movie in a little screening room in Fifth Avenue in New York at Columbia. I was all by myself, a little tiny room, all by myself in the room. When I finished, I could barely breathe. I could barely speak. I was sweating. Alan Parker was out there. He said, well, Billy, what do you think? I said, I love the film. What happened to my rowboat? I missed. Prison takes away so much from you. Escaping and getting myself out gave me back that sense of self. The prison it breaks you down in a way that you never recover from. And escaping got me out. I wanted to see my damn rowboat in the movie. And he said, what 45 minutes of this film do you want to cut out to put in your real escape? The audience has had enough. Get them out of the bloody theater. As a filmmaker myself now, I understand maybe why he did it. I understand that, price-wise, it would have cost them a lot of money to shoot on the sea at night and running through Turkey for 3 days. And Alan was maybe right. The audience has had enough. Get them out of the theater. But I missed it, and I certainly didn't like the ending with killing this guard. That guard was actually killed by a fellow prisoner who he'd beaten in jail. And while he was beating him, they found some hash somewhere, and they wanted to know where it was from, and the guy said it was from Allah, from God. And, of course, they beat him for days. And while they were beating him, the guard was cursing out his family, blah, I blank your sister, and I blank your mother, and I blank your grandmother. And this guy went free a year or two later, and the guard, most of the guards are just guys doing a job, a really nasty job. They're in the same danger we are. They make no money, which is why they were open to bribes. But the one guard in the movie, the bad guard, he was a sadist. He liked to hurt people. And he would walk in the room, everybody would go into that POW stance and look down, and all you're thinking is, please don't stop in front of me, because you didn't want this guy in front of you. He could smell fear. You literally can smell fear. He would walk down the line and just kind of sniff people. And he knew who was the guilty guy. But he was killed by this prisoner. The prisoner came up to him. The guard used to drink tea at this little chai shop every day before going into jail. The prisoner came up to him and he said, Hamid, which was the guard's name. Hamid Bey, do you remember me? Bang, he shot him in the arm. He said, that's for my sister. Bang, he shot him in the arm. That's for my grandmother. He shot him 8 times. Last time shot him in the head, put the gun on the table, and sat down and waited for the police. And when it came, he said, he dishonored my family. He disgraced my family, in jail while he was beating me. It's legally, on Turkish law, there's a crime called a crime of honor. And this guy got 15 years under the crime of honor point for killing this guard. I got 30 years with 2 kilos of hash. He got 15 years for a death. It's like, I don't know what to make of it.
You could have had a hash of honor.
There you go.
Could have made it. Hey, by the way, real quick, I'll tell you a funny story. Is one of my producers, Keith Davis, his mother, and he tells the story all the time, his mother was smuggling hash out of Morocco. Right around the same,
I love his mom.
Well, yeah, she's actually a famous. She was called the Marijuana Mom. She was a famous activist from around that time, around the 70s and stuff like that. But what do you call it? She got caught in Morocco. She had a couple of pounds of hash in Morocco in her hotel room, and they came in, they busted in, and she had it all hidden, and she just took out a couple ounces as though this is all we had, and she was pregnant at the time too with Keith. And they let her go, man. They felt sorry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. I hate to tell you.
Well, Keith is a lucky guy from back before he was even born, so good for him.
Yeah, he is, and he's an activist to this day. He's a really cool guy, and he's out there fighting in the streets for our rights and stuff like that. Great guy, Keith Davis. Oh, my God. So now, do you still talk at schools and stuff like that as well?
Actually, we have a bunch of college shows lining up here. 2016 is lining up to be a really good year. So we're going to be doing the show at colleges. And then, obviously, as I mentioned, in Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland. And I'm hoping here in Las Vegas, somewhere in the near future, you're going to be the first guy I contact, and I'm going to tell you when we're at, and I'll have 2 seats down in front for you for riding the Midnight Express somewhere in the coming year.
You know what, man? I would love that. Thank you so much. Right. And whenever you got a gig, man, let me know. I'll promote it for you. I'll mention it on the air.
Absolutely. I appreciate all you've done here tonight. And, getting my books out there is a good thing. Everybody's self-published these days. It was nice when a publisher did it, but they promoted it. They put me out there, but they took all the money. Now there's no publisher. You got to promote it yourself. So I do appreciate the chance for you allowing me to talk about my books. And this has been a real joy and a lot of fun, Ed. I would love to do it anytime.
Oh, no. Everyone's real excited about this, too. And another thing, too, you have to look forward to is all the other hosts listen to my show, and they'll steal all my guests. So you're going to be getting a lot of invitations in the next week. And the show repeats every day this week, too. So you'll be selling,
oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
You'll
all
be
right.
selling books, man. You'll be selling books. And I tell you, you should be selling books, especially the one with the letters in it, man. And there's pictures in there and stuff.
That's my wife's favorite book, too, because it wasn't meant to be a book, and this is what it really feels like, and it's got... Yeah, I've come to quite like it myself. The photos themselves kind of blow me away. I look at these pictures, I'm thinking, this is amazing to me.
Yeah, but like you say,
life is an amazing thing. What is it? My old grandmother used to say, it's a great life if you don't weaken. So you hold steady. I will be talking to you down the line, my friend.
Yeah, and I just want to say, too, that the picture that we used on the blog, you do look really healthy in that picture. Like you could swim the 17 miles.
Oh, I was healthy. I was really healthy. I mean...
Billy Hayes, thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Ed. You take care, my friend.
You too.
Bye.
Okay, there we had, guys. He was shot out of a cannon, man, from beginning to end. This guy was on fire, man. You gotta love these old New York guys, man. There's just something about them. And you notice too, man. All the guys we have on this show from the Bronx, man, are the coolest guests out there. From Joe DeToma on to Jim Rothstein, all the Bronx guys, man, are the coolest ones that we've had on this show. Okay, that was Billy Hayes.